Hey, what's up, everybody? Cast on Crit is one of the core archetypes of builds in Path of Exile, and it also happens to be one of the most complicated. You know, new players always see Cast on Crit builds, and they want to do it. It is very fun. It is one of the most fluid and pain-free styles of builds in the game, but it is also basically the first step into getting into more advanced builds in Path of Exile. And I just wanted to have something out there that people could just go to as a reference point for getting started in a Cast on Crit build. What is a Cast on Crit build? Well, when a mommy attack and a daddy spell love each other very much, and they make a Cast on Crit support gem baby, then they have a beautiful, happy family that is a fast and high damage, smooth build. That's not so much too far from the truth. So, for example, I am playing a Cast on Crit Forbidden Rite Occultist right now, and the way that it works is I am using an attack right now called Cyclone. 99% of all Cast on Crit builds use Cyclone. The reason for that is it attacks very, very quickly. You'll notice that it has a 300% of base attack speed on the attack itself, which obviously means that it's a lot easier to get a lot of attacks and do more damage. On top of that, the benefits of Cyclone are many. It's channeling, it's movement, it's very, very fluid. Other options are you can do a bow-based one with Rain of Arrows or Blast Rain, or even Barrage if you want to. You'll see some people doing something like Flicker Strike, but 99% of Cast on Crit builds are with using Cyclone. I'm attacking with Cyclone, and then I have it linked to a support gem called Cast on Critical Strike Support. I am using the Awakened version, which is better. We'll get into that in a second. What this says is it supports an attack skill and a spell. The attack skill will trigger a spell when it critically strikes an enemy. Cannot support totems, traps, or mines. Keep that in your mind. I've made that mistake in the past. Fall skills, channeling skills, and skills with reservation can also not be triggered. So basically on-hit, regular hand casting spells. And I have that linked to my Anomalous Forbidden Rite gem here. So when I attack with my Cyclone and it critically strikes, and if the cooldown is ready, we'll get into we'll spend a lot of time talking about cooldowns. It will then trigger casting my spell. You'll notice that it actually is a 7% less spell damage modifier, and because it's also linked to an attack, each individual hit of the spell will be significantly less damage than if you're hand casting it. That's basically the way that it's balanced, is we are able to trigger, balanced. We are able to trigger the spell many, many times with Cyclone, up to 10.1 times a second. We're basically on a 4-link here, and one of the links that the spell is linked to is actually a less damage modifier. So the goal here, right, is we want to trigger many, many times, get as many of the spells out there, and basically do damage by volume of spell casts. Also, every time the spell triggers, it will also trigger its mana cost, so you do have to be aware of that. So what we can see, first thing to look for is I slot in my Forbidden Rite here. You'll see that I am able to manually cast it. You see all these nice little kitty cats coming out. And then I put in my Cast on Critical Strike support. Mousing over it here, you'll see that it'll tell you that skill can't be used. That means that it is properly linked with Cast on Crit. That's the first thing to look out for. And then I have my Cyclone here. And you'll see this little green and sign here on both my Forbidden Rite and on my Cyclone. That means that they are connected together. That's how you know that they are supporting each other properly. And then, assuming everything is linked up properly, I can Cyclone into a pack of monsters. And when my Cyclone hits and then crits, it will trigger casting Forbidden Rite. And that is the core foundation of what's going on here. But there is a lot of nuance that you have to understand. Some of this is due to programming and server restrictions and all that. This is definitely, if you want to maximize your damage, not just a slot in, grab the right gems, and be off to the races. So you'll notice that at the very top here, it says the cooldown time is 0.15 seconds. So when I'm attacking, there is actually a cooldown between triggers. This is modifiable by cooldown recovery rate. However, we have the added restriction of the way that server frames are processed. We do know that the Path of Exile servers have a 33 millisecond tick rate between frames that are processed. So we have to line up our cooldown recovery rate with our attack speed to make sure that we're maximizing our damage as much as possible. But before we talk about that, let's talk about the Cast on Crit hierarchy of needs. Since we are both an attacking and spell critting based build, we have to take care of all of those things. So we have to make sure that we always hit the monster, right? If we're not hitting the monster, we're not able to crit the monster, and then we're not able to trigger our spell. So number one thing, if you're playing a cast on crit build, is you want to make sure that your chance to hit is 100%. And ideally, you want to get like full 100% all the way. And since we don't care about the damage that Cyclone itself is doing, we can use something along the lines of hits can't be evaded craft on our weapon to guarantee no matter what that we will hit. This means we don't care about blind or anything like that. This is generally what people do these days. It is a multiple Exalt craft though, so do be aware of that. Until you are able to do this craft, you can do things like use a high level precision, go for a lot of accuracy on your passive tree and all that. But ideally, you want to get that 100% hit chance. That is the first step, right? We need to hit with our Cyclone or our bow attack or whatever we're using, and then we are rolling for crit and all that. After that, you have to make sure that every single attack crits. If your attack doesn't crit, you aren't going to be triggering your cast on crit. The whole thing will tumble, right? Maybe because it's also Cyclone, but I really think of this as like multiple gears that are all spinning. And if one gear in the middle is slipping, there's this cascading effect where everything will be much, much worse, right? It's something along the lines of going from 95% chance to hit to 100% chance to hit is actually just 10% more damage because there's this cascading effect. You got your hit chance done. Now you got to get your crit chance to 100% as well. And there's all sorts of sources for your chance to crit. Currently at my, medium investment version of my build, easiest thing is just use an increased critical strike support in your 6-link. The cool thing here is, this will work for both my Cyclone and my Forbidden Right. So they both get their crit chance up. It's a double link there, which helps a lot. Eventually, right, since we're not really getting too much damage from the gem itself, you do want to remove this and get your crit chance from other sources. Very common things you can do is you could go for a Hunter chest that has elevated 2% spell and attack crit chance. Most common these days at time of recording is doing something like Brittle. You can use Leadership's Price. You can drop Brittle Ground from Boots, from the Eldritch Implicit, things like that. Most important thing after you can hit is make sure that every single hit is critting. You want this number here that says main hand critical strike chance to be 100%. As with everything, however, we do have to go to Path of Building to see the real number. You'll see that I have a 100% crit chance. Always double check in here. I have a 100% crit chance, when I'm actually fully loaded up, have my power charges and my flask going. That's what really matters. Everything, I'm just always gonna be telling you double check in Path of Building. There are a lot of very deceptive numbers that this character sheet will give you. The second most important thing in the cast on crit hierarchy of needs, make sure you have a 100% chance to crit with your attacks. After that, we have to care about our CDR and our attack speed. As I said before, think of it like gears. This is my rough way to approximate showing the way that you can think of it. Basically along the lines of the server is going to be, and that's what these are, right? These are the server frames that are processing when something actually happens. You have the server frame that's processing every 33 milliseconds. You have your cooldown, right? Which by default is every 0.15 seconds. So that's already not perfectly lining up, right, with the server frames. And then you have your attack rate with your Cyclone. And your Cyclone can very, very easily get an incredibly high attack rate. Like if you scale your attack speed as high as possible, you can very easily hit like 15 attacks per second with your Cyclone. However, think of it like a gear that's turning. That's what these pink lines are right up here. Think of it like it's like a gear that might be going too fast, right? And it's going to be slipping against the server frames. So if you don't have enough cooldown recovery rate, that 0.15 seconds, if you're attacking 15 times a second and the server frames are only every 33 milliseconds, it's going to be like 3 gears, right? That like one of them is slipping in the middle and they're like, you're not going to be able to trigger your cooldown every single time that a server frame processes, because maybe you attacked 2 times between the last 2 server frames. And so like you won't have an additional attack, right? There'll be a missing attack and it won't be lined up properly. Hopefully that makes some sense. I know it's a little funky, but luckily for you, this has all been calculated by very smart people, which not me here. So we know specific breakpoints that how much cooldown recovery rate you can have versus how much attack speed you can have for making sure that every single time a server frame procs, that it says, okay, you attacked, you got your 100% crit chance, and your cooldown is ready. Every single server frame, right? You want it to say your cooldown is ready, and it's able to proc, at the max speed as possible. So what that means by default is you can have a max attack speed of 6.06 attacks per second if you have 0 to 13% cooldown recovery rate. because there's these certain breakpoints, right? We can only process every 33 milliseconds with the server frame. So even if you have 13% cooldown recovery rate, you have to hit exactly 14 to get to the next breakpoint. That's what's going to push that cooldown time to be able to fit into another server frame as it's processing. 0 to 13 will allow you to go to 6.06 attacks per second. And as always, make sure you have everything calculated properly here in POB. Go to your configuration, make sure you got your tailwind turned on and everything, so you know exactly how many times you're triggering. The nice thing about POB especially, if you go to your spell that is linked with your cyclone here, it'll actually tell you your exact trigger rate. And so, if I didn't have enough cooldown recovery rate, I can actually show this very, very easily. If I take off my boots, you'll see that I can only trigger 5.27 times a second because I'm attacking more than the cooldown recovery rate. And this is basically, showing how the gears can slip, right? This actually puts me below the breakpoint of 52%. So I'm actually in this breakpoint, right? Which only allows me to attack 7.57 times a second. But since my character is attacking 9.85 times a second, that gear is slipping, right? I'm attacking too many times. And so some of my attacks are not lining up with that server frame. And you'll see that my trigger rate doesn't match my attack speed. I'm attacking 9.67 times a second, but I'm only triggering 5.27 times a second. So pay very, very close attention to these numbers, and you'll just look at the difference in damage, right? There's no damage on my boots except for cooldown recovery rate. Look at that. Boom. My damage literally doubles by making sure that I hit those breakpoints. That is going to be the key here. A fun thing that you can do is, since every single spell that is linked to the cyclone here in this circumstance, it has its own individual cooldown, I could instead actually put in a second spell in my 6 link there, and then they would each have their individual cooldowns that would be able to trigger if you don't have enough cooldown recovery rate. And since they're triggering individually, that's actually going to be more damage. If I have multiple spells that could fit into my build. The main thing is you just got to memorize these numbers if you don't want to fully understand how this works. So you're going to be looking for 14 to 51%, and that will allow you to attack 7.57 times a second, and then 52% will allow you to attack 10.1 times a second. Also, a thing to note is that if you are dual wielding, all of these numbers are doubled. This will be 12 times, this will be 15 times, and this will be 20 attacks per second if you are dual wielding Cosprees or something like that. But that is very, very uncommon these days. And then after that, it just really naturally follows that you're going to be going for your spell crit and then really focusing on how much damage each individual spell hit can do. And the way that scales will be, individual based on your build and the way that it's all put together. Generally, you're going to be going for big crit multi-jewels, you're going to go for your increased damage or anything like that. The thing is, with these types of builds, is you don't even care about that stuff, right? It is this cascading hierarchy of needs. If you're not hitting, you're not gonna crit with your attack. And then if your cooldown isn't lined up with your attack speed, you're gonna be doing half damage or even worse. And then usually you're gonna be going for your spell crit to make sure that spell can crit. And then you do increased damage and crit multi and your bottled faith and increased damage taken. This is the very last thing that you're usually thinking about. It is often also the most expensive thing. Because you're going for really big jewels and stuff, and that's the main way you're going to be scaling. But until you get there, you're going to want to understand all of this stuff, and it's generally all of the same for most of these types of builds. If you know how to do this, you will much more easily be able to play other archetypes of cast on crit. And then the other thing I would like to show here is just the way that you can start working with the cooldown recovery rate. You'll notice that Awakened Cast on Crit by itself has cooldown recovery rate. So at level 5, it has 22%, which as we know, puts us above that 14%. And so with this gem alone, no other sources of cooldown recovery, I'm just gonna start saying CDR. That's what we usually call it. No other sources of CDR. This alone puts you at that 7.57 attacks per second breakpoint, which is great. And so this is really, you just buy this gem. And honestly, this league, I don't know if it's always gonna stay this low, but a 520 is only 1.3x. In the past, this was a very expensive gem. This was 6x minimum. So if that holds, then spectacular. It's very common now from the Maven invitations. This gem alone, and then you'll notice that I have a lot of sources of gem level. It gets more CDR based on that. I have +2 from my Skin of the Lords here, and then I also have +3 from the Crit Mastery right here, which actually makes my level 5 Awakened Cast on Crit a level 10, which is very cool, which gives me 37% increased cooldown recovery rate. And then I also have a pair of boots that have elevated CDR, which gives me 20%, and that puts me at 57%, which is over the 52% breakpoint, so I can attack up to 10.1 times a second. When I replace the Skin of the Lords, I will lose that +2 level, and I'll actually be at exactly 50%. Then I will just need 2% more CDR, and look at this. How beautiful is this? 2% from an Abyss Jewel. That is the perfect breakpoint, which allows us to hit that 52%. They definitely did this on purpose. So, you know, if you have elevated CDR here, a level 5 gem here, or a level 6 gem, we'll also let you do it without the Abyss Jewel. That will give you the CDR that you need. And then the other primary place that you would get CDR is from a belt slot. That's actually why I have a Crusader Stygian Visor right here. I was going for that, but I never hit it, and I actually hit really good suffixes here. And I don't need it at the moment, but you can also just get it from your belt instead if that's you know, an available option for your build and you're not going for a Mage Blood or a Headhunter. And then I just really want to hammer home. This is a big pitfall that has actually bit me in the past, is the attacks per second. It sucks, but this character sheet lies to you. It is not accurate whatsoever. Please do not rely on the numbers in this character sheet to be accurate. The attacks per second here, this will not be accurate for things like Tailwind or Onslaught because those modify action speed. And for some reason, the character sheet ignores action speed modifiers. So you have to go to POB and make sure you're using these check marks, and you'll notice that, you know, it'll actually show your attacks per second here if you check it in here. If you go into a map and you get Tailwind and Onslaught, you'll notice that this number won't change, and it just sucks. And you're like, oh, I think I'm fine. And then your damage feels bad and you don't know why. And so always, always, always with cast on crit builds, double check in POB, and you know, you'll make sure that you avoid any of those pitfalls. All right, thanks for watching. Hopefully this was very instructional and helpful for you. And definitely get subscribed if you're into more stuff like this or you just like to hang out. I'm really passionate about getting good information out there. I want to elevate the knowledge base of the Path of Exile community and make sure that we're all just having a good time playing this game. So yeah, let me know if there's anything I missed. There's something to add in the comments. I definitely want to make sure this is a nice resource for people that are interested in playing a cast on crit build and they're new to the game. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all later. Goodbye.